Greetings and welcome to Mental Health Trailblazers, Psychiatric Nurses Speak Up. I'm your host, Andreas Kasai, and I am very happy that you can join us as we kick off Season 3 of the Minority Fellowship Program at the American Nurses Association's podcast. This season, we are focusing on nursing's response to the deepening mental health crisis affecting adolescents and youth in America today. The situation is dire, with government at the highest levels from the Surgeon General to the President of the United States raising the alarm and calling for urgent action. The mental health of young people is regularly making headline news. The front page of the Washington Post Sunday, March 19th print edition featured an article on the increasing use of the Baker Act, a legal provision that allows the involuntary commitment of persons deemed mentally ill and pose a threat to themselves or others in school settings. Another article that same day reported on schools all over the country suing social media companies for fueling the youth mental health crisis, squarely pinning blame for rising rates of depression and suicidal tendencies on social media. And that is where we begin this new season, with a conversation on the impact of social media and internet culture on the mental health of young people. To help us understand what is happening with social media and the role that nursing can play is Minority Fellowship Program Doctoral Fellow Jayandra Antisdel. Jayandra has served as a psychiatric mental health nurse for the past 2 decades and is an assistant professor at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana. She has been a keen observer of the impact that social media is having on young people, and through her research, she strives to find methods for healthcare professionals to engage teens and promote healthy online behaviors. Jayandra, welcome to Mental Health Trailblazers.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's dive into what I think will be a very enlightening discussion. Let me start by asking you to set the scene for us. How is social media and internet culture fueling the mental health crisis among adolescents and young adults in America?
One of the main concerns, most significant concerns I've noticed surrounding social media and internet culture is this 24/7 connection that it provides. The boundaries that teens have between online and offline, they become blurred, and it becomes difficult for teens to separate themselves from the negative influence of social media and internet culture. They have difficulty identifying the impact of these influences on their own mental health. As an example, one thing that I found during one of my assessments is this normalization of harassment, normalization of aggressiveness, and sexual harassment. In some of my assessments that I've done with teen girls, they've talked about experiences they've had online with sexual harassment, and they've come to expect it. They've come to believe that these are normal interactions and expect it if they want to be involved in some of the popular online spaces, such as gaming or chat discussions.
So why do they keep going if they feel the negative impact? What is happening in their minds, and why is this so alarming?
Well, social media allows for this instant gratification. You post something and it feels good when people comment on your post. It feels good when someone likes your post. It feels good when there are people engaging with your post. So there is this sense of fulfillment and satisfaction that comes so quickly when you're engaged online. Some people also talked about this fear of missing out when they're not online as well. So they know their friends are online. They know that their friends are interacting online. And maybe if they're not online, they feel like they're missing out in these interactions with their friends. So it becomes important for them to go to these spaces, even if they are experiencing some of these negative influences.
It sounds like, and the discourse is saying that social media is addictive. It plays off the same brain chemistry, the stimulation effects as mood altering substances. So, if we are saying that social media is addictive and it's like a drug, do we then use the same tools that are in the toolkit for resolving drug or substance addictions?
I think we need to keep in mind that the social media itself is not inherently addictive. It's the way it is designed. with the instant likes, the gratification, like I talked about before. Also, the fact that sometimes in some of these platforms, you're having content that is like an endless scroll where it is never ending. So, the way social media has been designed, those can definitely create addictive tendencies, like you talked about before with the dopamine pathways. What can we do about it? Should we treat it the same way as addiction? I think going the route of saying, like, well, no social media for you, stopping social media altogether is a little bit unrealistic for our teens, especially as they are required to be online for education, for finding employment, for recreation. But there are definitely some things that we need to talk about as far as moderation. We need to make sure that teens are not online when they should be sleeping, not online when they should be eating. We need to identify when teens are prioritizing what their activities are online over their daily needs. Some things that we can do as far as some of the same things that they teach about is addiction is teaching mindfulness, their feelings when they're using social media, identify like when they're having these negative feelings and tying these negative feelings to the experiences that they're having, identifying when it's appropriate to step away, identify when they might have to block certain individuals or block certain influences or not go to certain specific areas, things that are going to trigger them, which is something that they talk about in addiction care as well, staying away from the situations that might trigger a craving or trigger a relapse.
Let me take you back a little bit.
Mhm.
You've worked as a mental health nurse for 2 decades now. And in that time, I think the environment and the way that mental health challenges manifest in young people has changed or has evolved. How was it when you first started working in this area? What were like the main adolescent, young adult mental health issues? And how have you seen social media affecting that?
When I first started, they were talking about issues of cyber victimization when teens might have been sending messages back and forth to each other, might have been annoying each other, or teens messaging each other mean statements. Or you might have seen teens like sending pictures of embarrassing situations back and forth. But now, since times have changed and social media has these platforms that allow for more user generated content, we're seeing the rise of these influencers that have these followers that influences the minds of these teens. We're seeing teens being involved in dangerous TikTok challenges. For example, recently there was a fire challenge
Yes.
where teens were putting a flammable substance on the mirror in the shape of a heart, and then they'd light the heart on fire. And the image would show the heart on fire. And so teens were doing this and suffering severe burns, injuring themselves, injuring others. So, where in the past, some of these instances were more individualized and local. Now, because of this user generated content and the ability to spread this content to more and more people worldwide, we have people in the US who are being hurt because of challenges that are starting thousands of miles away from them. It's not as localized as it was when I first began.
In the recent past, we've had the experience with COVID as well, where all of a sudden society shut down, schools shut down, and social media became a big part of how young people communicated. How has COVID impacted it? What have you seen like on the ground?
When schools were shut down and activities shut down, social media was the main form of socializing. More teens had more access and more time to be in online spaces where they should not have been. And then more teens were definitely exposed to more hateful messages, more instances of cyber victimization and cyberbullying. We saw that cybercrime had definitely increased, and teens were highly targeted in these cybercrimes, such as extortion, sextortion, cyber fraud. So we did see really high instances of teens being affected because they were more vulnerable.
And how does that play out in terms of what you're seeing in the healthcare setting?
What I've been seeing is that teens are reporting higher instances of being victimized by online peers. For example, we had an instance where it was throughout the school, videos and photos that were being shared online of someone that was involved in an embarrassing, compromising position. And there were many people that were affected after this. The teens are experiencing high symptoms of depression, high symptoms of burdensomeness, poor self-esteem, and they talk about how they feel like life is no longer worth living because they feel like what has been released, what has been shown about them is something that they won't be able to live down. I recall one family deciding to move their teen because of embarrassing photos and videos that had been placed on the internet that was shared throughout the school. The family decided to actually move out of state
Wow.
because of the harassment that they were experiencing.
I was looking at a fact sheet from Mental Health America, and it said there like 59% of US teens have personally experienced abusive online behaviors.
Mhm.
45% believe that it neither had a positive nor negative impact. 31% said it had mostly a positive impact, but 24% said it had mostly a negative impact. So teens are still, for the most part, not acknowledging that this is a
Mhm.
major problem for them, at least the majority of them. How do we then get young people who are exposed to and experiencing all of this to acknowledge that there is an issue and come forward and seek the support that they might need to lead more productive lives and get off of the negative spirals that social media can lead them on?
I absolutely love this question because it speaks to my research. What I have found in research is that teens don't really identify their experience with the term cyberbullying. They don't identify their experience with the term cyber victimization because it has become so normalized. What I am interested in is understanding how teens experience cyber victimization, cyberbullying in their own words. I think it's important to meet teens where they are. We need to ask specifically about the experiences they're having and not try to group these experiences under these terms, cyberbullying and cyber victimization, because they typically don't identify with that. We need to identify some of the scenarios that they have experienced and maybe even do some role playing about why this experience is problematic, identify how it affected them. So, definitely, there needs to be some education about not just digital literacy, but what is appropriate and what is inappropriate online. The teen that I had assessed, she had just come to expect that sexual harassment was just a part of being a part of, I believe it was some sort of gaming discussion or gaming platform. She just expected that in this gaming platform that girls would be sexually harassed. And to her, if you were to ask if she was being cyberbullied, she would say no, because what she was experiencing was normalized to her.
If it was normal or if it was normalized to her, how did she end up coming for care?
Well, when I do my assessments now, I take some time to ask teens about what's happening online, what kind of websites they like to go to, what social media platforms they like to go to, if they're involved in online gaming and what sort of gaming they like to play. And some of the questions that I ask, has anyone ever harmed you online or threatened you online or made you feel uncomfortable online? And when I asked some of those questions, she had opened up and she had told me some of that information that she had felt uncomfortable. And those questions led to other questions about her feelings, which led her to tell me that she was having some feelings of suicide and depression. And we were able to get her the care that she needed because I had built a rapport with her based on something that had interested her.
Right. So, but is this now standard practice for people who are working in behavioral health? Do they assess for social media influence, internet culture?
Currently, no, there is no standard protocol or practice for screening social media or internet behavior, or even screening for cyber victimization. There is a growing recognition of the need to address these issues. Mental health professionals can definitely ask these questions in their own screenings as part of their own assessment, but there is no standard practice for this yet.
You are listening to Mental Health Trailblazers Psychiatric Nurses Speak Up, brought to you by the SAMHSA Minority Fellowship Program at the American Nurses Association. The stigma about mental health or substance abuse issues is particularly prevalent in underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. One way to overcome that stigma is to recruit more nurses from all underrepresented communities into these fields, so that they can focus on eliminating stigma about mental illness and substance use through their leadership in research, practice, education, and policy development. Receiving treatment from someone with a similar background builds trust that can lead to better outcomes. The SAMHSA Minority Fellowship Program at the American Nurses Association is actively engaged in identifying and supporting nursing students seeking graduate degrees in psychiatric mental health nursing. Visit emfb.org to learn more. And how would you describe the way that mental health professionals in general, and then nurses in particular, are responding to the youth mental health crisis driven by social media?
It always surprises me when I bring up these topics to my colleagues or when I talk about this topic, the amount of people that are still surprised by what is out there for teens. Our experience online as an adult is completely removed from what teens experience online. And so I've found in my experience, there really isn't a frame of reference for some of my colleagues and for what teens experience online. And so when I talk to them about some of the harms that teens face when teens are being told to harm themselves or kill themselves, or how normalized it is for teens to say that to each other, I find that my colleagues are often surprised. So there might be some disconnect on why this is so important and why it's important to address these in the screenings.
And are there any nuances when it comes to young people from minority backgrounds that mental health care providers should be looking out for?
People of color are experiencing high rates of discrimination and harassment online. I've also found in my research that LGBTQ individuals are also vulnerable online. And in teens, when you're being targeted online, there is this sense either to retaliate, and they might act out online in retaliation, or there might be this sense to help seek and look for other spaces online for support or help. And while that might sound like that might be beneficial, some of the places that they are going for help might be actually more dangerous. They might seek help from strangers. And so people who are culturally, ethnically, languagely diverse or LGBTQ individuals, they actually might be more vulnerable to harms online because of the lack of belongingness that they face, or discrimination or harassment that they face might drive them further to being more vulnerable online.
So this is a growing problem in society, and something that anybody who's dealing with psychiatric mental health should be equipped to handle. So, what do nurses need in their toolkit to respond better? And like, how can nursing schools, how can nursing education better prepare emerging psychiatric mental health nurses to deal with issues related to social media and mental health?
That is a great question. So, in our textbooks, when we're teaching mental health, there is definitely a section about victimization, about assault, about battery, and about the care of these individuals. What's missing from these topics are issues related to cyber victimization, cybercrime, and how information about perpetrators and the pathways that they have to target teens, that's all missing from our textbooks. And I think there needs to be more information surrounding what different types of cyber victimization, how it might occur, characteristics of predators who are targeting victims, and then the characteristics of victims themselves. Who is more vulnerable to cyber victimization? That's all information that we need more of in mental health nursing.
How can we use social media to become part of the answer, part of the solution? How can social media help young people instead of hurt them?
I have seen some very interesting instances where people are going to the source. Like, for example, on TikTok, we have some of these influencers that I talked about that can be predatory. Well, we also have very knowledgeable experts that are coming to these same spaces and providing real and helpful information for teens in a language and in languages that they might understand, in a way they might understand, in a way that might be more palatable to them. So I think going to these spaces and not letting these negative influencers define the norm of these spaces. If we come to these spaces as experts and we become the defining individuals of what's appropriate, what's real, what's true, what's safe, I believe that social media can be used as a power for good to reach teens and help promote healthy behavior, help promote internet use.
Are you on social media?
I am. I am.
How do you become that trusted adult that young people can come to for support?
I think it's extremely important as healthcare professionals. If we're in this field, we need to stay up to date on these digital trends. We need to know about the social media platforms that are out there. And we also need to be participating in them professionally, being a beacon of truth and a beacon of information that teens can find. And also make sure that we're using the teens' language, make sure that we can speak to their experience as well. When I assess teens and I ask them about their social media platforms that they use, if I can identify that I know what they're talking about, they are much more likely to open up to me. Remember, I was talking about a teen about one of the websites that she used, and she was discussing, that she can make an avatar and make it, pretty and design it to be like her. And I talked about, oh, yeah, I know about that. Some people come up with some really cute designs. And she just got really engaged in the assessment. And I was able to get a lot of information out of her that helped her care. The same with the teen who talked about what she experienced online in the gaming platform. The reason I knew to ask that question is because I've been involved in some gaming myself. So I know what can be said in those spaces. Letting them know that, this is something that happens and, that they aren't alone, it really helps build that rapport and it really helps them feel safe to share that information with you.
I think you just hit on an important subject for a seminar or a webinar or, the kind of thing that nurses do need in their toolkit. Speaking the language of young people, the lingo of Gen Z and the ones that are coming afterwards. Because yes, if you can speak my language, then I can communicate and relate to you in a much better and much more effective way. So I think that is one definite suggestion for people who do want to respond to this youth mental health crisis. Taking it back to you, I had some questions for you on your own personal journey as a psychiatric mental health nurse. What led you to pursue psychiatric mental health nursing as a profession?
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that question. Mental health nursing, this career is very personal to me. As a child, I grew up with my mom who was diagnosed with a very debilitating mental illness. And so I have a lot of insight from the family perspective and from a young child of what people with these debilitating mental illnesses, what they go through and what their lives are like, because I was there and I was seeing it. When I was in nursing school, I knew that I wanted to be in psych nursing. That was the goal, to end up in psych nursing, because I wanted to help other family members who went through some of the things that I went through. A lot of the things that we as family members experience, there's a lot of confusion. We don't know what's happening or why it's happening. There's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of stigma, a lot of hiding, a lot of shame, not feeling like anyone else is going through what you're going through. My lifelong passion has been to bring some of these issues to the forefront.
Thank you for sharing that. I also imagine that the journey to get to where you are, to become an assistant professor, has not been 100% smooth, that there must have been challenges along the way. If you could describe some of those for us, and how you overcame them, especially because the profession is, it's not always easy for people of color.
Mhm. I think one of my biggest challenges was, or is, my raging imposter syndrome. I feel like I have been socialized to believe that I should not exist in these white spaces. Like, I've been socialized to believe that academia is a white space, and that this space that I am in is not for me, if that makes any sense. And so, building from that, everything that I have done and I have worked has to overcome this bias against my own self, to overcome that.
And how do you do that?
I think it's most important to have a mentor,
Mm.
to have someone else. I have two wonderful mentors right now that tell me that what I'm doing is possible, and that where I am is where I am meant to be, and that I am meant to go farther. And just having someone there that is supportive is extremely beneficial. We talk about representation as well. Unfortunately, throughout my education until recently, I was actually the very first Black nursing professor that I had ever met. I had an experience when I had first started teaching. I was teaching at a community college here nearby. And I think it was just my second year of teaching. Someone had wrote the N word on my office door, just blazoned it across. And there was a huge outpouring of support about it. But I remember one of my students, and I'll never forget, she came to me and she told me how important it was to have a professor that looked like her, and she hoped that this experience that I had would not lead me to stop teaching, because she said that I was needed, that she needed
Absolutely.
me.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I think having that representation would
Yeah.
have been beneficial to me as well.
Well, I think it probably has made you stronger. And that student was right. As you are teaching, as you continue in that profession, it'll make it easier for others who are following. And I would be remiss to not ask you about we've talked about things like cyberbullying, and there are other things, for example, body shaming, or young girls comparing themselves to maybe even young boys as well, comparing themselves to the ideal images, quote unquote ideal images, that they see being posted on social media. But there's another type of content that's coming, and this specifically for people of color, when, for example, media stories, current events, when something like the George Floyd murder goes viral, what happens to the mental health of young people of color as they are consuming this? And how does it impact their behavior moving forward?
What a great question. I remember just recently there was a recent instance of police brutality against an African American individual, and there were warning messages in these online communities for people of color talking about how this was going to come out and that it might be harmful for us to watch. Definitely, some of these images that are out there, what's happening in the media, this Black trauma that is being released, it can feel like it's being put on for entertainment and shock value, and that can be definitely harming to people in these communities. So when I saw that recently about the messages, the warning people that this was coming out and warning people that they may not want to watch, I was deeply sad, but how insightful was it for these people to realize that these constant barrage of seeing Black people bruised and hurt and discriminated and harassed online is harmful to the community. And it is, it creates, what I was talking about of down the line, this generational trauma up to the point where we have people who are feeling like they don't belong, feeling like they are in danger, in fear of, what could happen. So I do think this constant barrage of this happening can be harmful, and we need to be mindful. We need to practice self-assessment before we can view some of these images.
Yeah. Well, Deandra, thank you very much for this very insightful discussion.
I just want to thank you for this opportunity to be able to talk about this topic that is extremely important to me. And I hope that in the future we'll be able to develop better instruments that are able to identify when teens are having these negative experiences. I hope that we are able to make more safe spaces that teens can go to talk about these experiences. So thank you for letting me put this word out there.
You are most welcome. And that does it for this episode of Mental Health Trailblazers, Psychiatric Nurses Speak Up. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and I look forward to you joining us on future episodes. This is the Minority Fellowship Program at the American Nurses Association podcast, featuring nurse scientists addressing the psychiatric and mental health issues affecting underrepresented communities across America. You can always find us online at emfp.org and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. The views expressed by the speakers and host do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the Department of Health and Human Services, nor does mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government.